Good morning. I'd like to welcome everybody here this morning. So this morning, I want to continue on a little bit on the same thought as my last Sunday school lesson. Now I know all the children are just paying attention all the time. So everybody knows exactly what my children's lesson was last time, right? So, no? Does anybody remember? Who can remember what my children's lesson was last time I went up here to speak? Anybody remember? Jesus is greater than, just a hint. Anybody remember?
Jesus is greater than us?
No, not greater. He is greater than us, but that's not what my lesson was about. Jesus is greater than the temple. Oh, of course, now you guys remember, right? Jesus is greater than the temple. Everybody remembers my lesson from last time now, right? So last time I was talking about Jesus is greater than the temple. When Jesus, he's talking to the Pharisees and he's telling them there is one greater than the temple here. He's talking about himself. I'm pretty sure you guys all remember that now. So this morning I'm going to kind of, in the same chapter, that's found in Matthew chapter 12. In the same chapter, further down, Jesus says there's two other things that Jesus is greater than. So today, in Matthew chapter 12, verse 42, Jesus says, at the end of that verse, he says, "Indeed, a greater than Solomon is here." So Jesus, he says, greater than Solomon. For some time ago, Dan was going through the book of Kings and the book of Chronicles, and he was talking about Solomon. Now, we know a lot of things that Solomon did, right? Solomon was a really wise king. So I want to start this morning. I'm just going to talk a little bit about who Solomon was. So Jesus says that he is greater than Solomon. So let's look at who Solomon is. So I'm just going to pick a few passages of Scripture that kind of define Solomon's life, or define the part that Jesus says he's greater than this. And we're just going to talk about that a little bit, and I'll kind of try to go through here really quickly. So in 1 Kings chapter 3, in verse 5, it says that in Gibeon, there's this place called Gibeon. So in Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. So Solomon is sleeping, and as Solomon is sleeping, the Lord appears to Solomon. God appears to Solomon, and he asks him, God says to him, "Ask, what shall I give you?" So God's asking Solomon, "What shall I give to you?" And this is happening in his dream. Now sometimes when you dream, you'll have dreams that reveal maybe a little bit about your inner fears, a little bit about your inner desires. Sometimes you have dreams and you're like, is that really in my heart? And you're like, Lord, please take that from my heart and please don't put that on my heart. Or sometimes you'll have dreams and you're like, it reveals to you a bit more about your heart and where your heart is at. So now here's God asking him in a dream. And in his dream, he's asking him, whatever you want, ask and I will give it to you. So here Solomon's true heart comes out, and it shows what's in Solomon's heart and what Solomon's desire is. And Solomon says, you have shown great mercy to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in truth and righteousness and uprightness of heart with you. You have continued this great kindness for him, and you have given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. He says, "Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David, but I am a little child, and I do not know how to go out or come in." So Solomon is revealing his own heart. He says, I'm like a little child. He realized that Saul was king, and Saul first he started off right, but then he left God. So then Saul's children could not be king. But he recognized that Solomon had no right to be king apart from it being the will of God. So he recognizes that it's the will of God, and it's because of David's uprightness that he was king. So he says, and he says to him, "And your servant," he's talking about himself, that Solomon, he says, "and your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people." So he says, this is God's people that he's leading. He's going to be king over God's people. He says they are too numerous to be numbered or counted. So he says, here's this great many of people. And he has this great task in front of him. And this is what his request is. He says, "Therefore, give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? So that's what God, so this is the true heart of Solomon. Solomon's like, I want to have an understanding heart so I can judge your people, and I can judge between good and evil, so I can judge your people the way that God would have him judge his people. So his heart is to have the wisdom that comes from God. So this pleases God. Everybody knows that this is something that really pleased God. So in verse 11 in 1 Kings chapter 3, it says, Then God said to him, Because you have asked this thing and have not asked for long life for yourself, nor have asked riches for yourself, nor have asked the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern justice, behold, I have done according to your word. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall any like you arise after. So he says that, because he has asked for this thing, he's going to give him an understanding heart. He didn't ask that his enemies would all die. He didn't ask that for riches for himself. He didn't ask for himself to be able to rule as king for a long time, but instead he's asking for wisdom. He says he's going to give him wisdom so that there's no one else who has ever lived that is going to have the wisdom like Solomon, and nobody afterwards either is going to have the wisdom like Solomon. There's no ruler in this earth that has wisdom like Solomon. He says, I have given you what you have asked, both riches and honor. He says, he says he's going to give him an understanding heart. And he says, and I've also given you what you have not asked. So he says, because you asked for what is good, you have asked for wisdom. He says, I'm going to also give you what you did not ask for, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be any like you among the kings all your days. So that the whole life of Solomon, there is not going to be a single king anywhere in the kingdom, anywhere in the earth, that is going to be richer and more have more honor than Solomon does. And he says, and so if you walk in my ways and keep my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. And he says, as long as he's a good king, as long as he walks in the ways of God and his statutes and his commandments, he's also going to give him a long life. So these are the promises that God gave to Solomon. Now Solomon, we know that his reputation went far and broad. And you know what? There were kings from all over the world, all over the known world. Everybody that heard about Solomon's like, I want to be on this king's good side. I want to be on this king's on this king's side, so that if we end up going to war anywhere or anything happens, I want Solomon, the king of Israel. I want him on my side. So what they did is they went to Solomon and says, hey, listen, we want to be allies here. We want to be on the same side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my daughter to marry. So he married kings. He had 700 wives. They were all royal wives from royal families from all over the world. Everybody wanted to be on Solomon's good side and say, you know what, just like right now, a lot of countries, they want to be on the United States' good side. So they make peace treaties, they make treaties with the United States. Well, all these kings were making treaties with Solomon. He married the daughter of Pharaoh. He married the daughter of all the kings around him because all the kings wanted to be on his good side. So it says that he had 700 wives that were all royal wives. And in verse 10, or in chapter 10, we hear about a queen that came to visit Solomon. Does anybody know who the queen was? Yes, that's right, the Queen of Sheba. So the Queen of Sheba, she came from a long ways away, and she came and she heard about this king in Israel. And she hears about the king of Israel. So in chapter 10 it says, now the Queen of Sheba heard the fame of Solomon according to the name of the Lord. And she came to test him with hard questions. So she came to see, how wise is Solomon? How wise is this king? So she came to test him. So she came to Jerusalem with a very great procession, with a lot of people. She came with this huge train of people with camels and that bore spices with very much gold and precious stones. And she came to Solomon and spoke with him about all that was in her heart. So all the things that was in her heart, she came and she spoke to Solomon to say, and she tested him. She asked him all kinds of questions. And he says, so Solomon answered all her questions, and there was nothing too difficult for the king that the king could not explain to her. So everything that she asked, there was nothing that was so difficult that the king could not explain to her. So the king answered all her questions. And it says, and the queen of Sheba, when she had seen the wisdom of Solomon and the house that he had built, when he seen his wisdom and the house that he built, because he had built a very nice house, and she has seen the food that was on his table, the seating of his servants, the service of his waiters and their apparel, his cupbearers, and his entryway, which went up into the house of the Lord. He says, then there was no spirit within her. He says, then all of her pride, everything that she thought was great from where she came from, she saw everything that Solomon did. She saw that his servants, all of his servants were happy, his cupbearers. Everybody was happy that was in Solomon's presence. It says she had no more spirit left within her. And she says to the king, it was a true report which I had heard in my own land about your words of your wisdom. However, I did not believe the words until I came and saw with my own eyes, and indeed, the half was told to me. So she says, like, only half of the greatness of Solomon was told to her. She says it's far greater than what she had heard. It says, your wisdom and prosperity exceeds the fame which I heard. And now she tells him all the things that she's observing. She says, happy are your men, and happy are those who are these your servants, who stand continually before you and hear your wisdom. She says, blessed be the Lord your God, who delighted in you, setting you on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord has loved Israel forever, therefore he made you king to do justice and righteousness. That's what she's saying. She says, because he is such a wise man, because he is such a loyal king, she says the Lord has blessed him. And yeah, the Lord has made him king so that he could rule with justice and righteousness. So then she comes and she gives them all kinds of stuff, all kinds of gold, all kinds of spices. She brings all kinds of wood from different lands, all kinds of rare woods, and she brings all kinds of gifts to Solomon to reward him and just to show her gratitude for being able to meet Solomon. He says that some of the stuff that she brought is stuff that has never been seen in Israel after those days. So she brought an extraordinary amount of wealth that she had brought to Jerusalem just to be able to meet the king. And now Jesus, he's talking about Solomon. Like Solomon, everybody knew the wealth of Solomon. Everybody knew who Solomon was. Now Solomon, at the end of his days, he did not serve the king anymore, or he did not serve God in the way that he did when he first started. And Solomon's kingdom ended. He only had a few more sons. His sons, after a while, then his kingdom ended. But everybody knew about the fame of Solomon and who Solomon was. And then in Matthew chapter 12, verse 42, Jesus tells the disciples, he says, the queen of the south, so the queen of Sheba, he says, the queen of the south will rise up and judge this, and will rise up in the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. So he's saying, this queen of Sheba, she's going to judge. She's going to stand up when God judges everybody, when God judges the world. This queen of Sheba, she's going to be there too at the judgment, and she's going to observe the generation that is in the time of Jesus, and she says that she's going to condemn them. She's going to condemn them, saying that how could you not see the wisdom that was in Jesus? When Jesus came and taught, he taught with greater wisdom than Solomon did. Anytime the Pharisees asked him any kind of questions and they tried to trap Jesus and try to get him to misspeak or to get him trapped in his words, then Jesus could answer all their questions in a way that stumped them, and they stopped asking him questions. They no longer asked him questions because they didn't dare to ask Jesus questions, because Jesus revealed to them how little they knew about the scriptures. And they were supposed to be leading the people of Israel. And he says that indeed a greater than Solomon is here. So Jesus is saying that greater, like all the greatness that you heard about Solomon, Jesus is greater than Solomon. He says if the queen of the south, if she was alive in the days of Jesus, then she would have came to see Jesus. She would have came to hear about the wisdom of Jesus. And we see what was the difference between Solomon and Jesus. Well, we knew that Jesus was lowly. Jesus was humble. He wasn't someone that exalted himself. Jesus was born in a stable in the small town of Bethlehem. But Solomon was born in the palace. Yeah, Solomon was born in the palace in the city of Jerusalem. He was born in the capital city. Solomon was a man that had thousands of servants. He had a huge army that would serve him. He had some of his best guards, some of his royal guards. He gave them shields of gold. He had made 3 shields that were, or was it 2 shields or 3 shields that were completely gold? And he had made 300 other shields that were lined with gold. So he had golden shields for his top servants. He had thousands of people that would follow him. He had servants. Now Jesus had 12 followers. Jesus had a small following. Jesus was also homeless, and he said that foxes have places, have dens, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Jesus was homeless and oftentimes didn't have a place to lay his head. But Solomon, he lived in palaces. He had many houses. He had great houses that he built that the Queen of Sheba came and saw how great his house was. And Solomon, if Solomon wanted to go somewhere else, well, he'd get on one of his royal horses and he would go somewhere to wherever he wanted to go. But Jesus walked everywhere. Jesus walked everywhere he wanted to go. So now the disciples, the Pharisees, they'd be looking at that and saying, wait a second, we know the difference between Solomon and Jesus. Solomon was a wise man in royalty. He was royalty. He had an extremely huge amount of wealth, and Jesus was a poor carpenter that had to walk everywhere he wanted to go. And Jesus is saying that there was someone greater than Solomon here. Solomon was a man of great wisdom. He wrote the Proverbs. He knew all the Proverbs by heart. Solomon, God blessed him with a great amount of wisdom, a great amount of knowledge. And even though Solomon knew about the winds and the wind patterns and knew how the wind worked, Jesus could calm the winds. Jesus could speak to the winds and calm the sea. Jesus created the winds. And even though Solomon had a great fleet of trading ships that would go to all the nations and all around the world and trade, and they'd bring back all kinds of precious stuff from all over the world, Solomon knew about how the ocean currents worked. He knew about how the ocean, how the waterways worked, and he could send ships to different parts of the world to bring back precious spices and bring back all kinds of things that he would trade with. But Jesus could walk on the water. And even though Solomon built the temple, a great place that was so magnificent, greater than any building that had been built in those up to that time, Jesus says that he has built for us a place in heaven, a place that will never will never perish, an everlasting home. The temple was destroyed. The place that Jesus is building for us, it's a house that is going to be an eternal house, a place for us to live for eternity. And you look at Solomon. Solomon, he'd host grand feasts for royalty and have many people that he would come and throw grand banquets. And he had the wealth to feed thousands of people. He'd feed them all kinds of extravagant food. But Jesus could feed 5,000 people with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Jesus could take ordinary water and turn it into wine. And even though Solomon built this great temple, a great temple that was destroyed, Jesus has made you and I his temple, an everlasting temple, a temple that is not made with hands, and a temple that is going to be everlasting, will never be destroyed. And even though Solomon had great wealth like you have never seen, wealth like you can take the richest man on the earth today, and it's nowhere near the wealth that Solomon had. Solomon's house didn't have a single silver cup because silver was too common. Silver was, that's for poor people. Solomon's cups were all made of gold. And in the entire city of Jerusalem, everybody had silver cups. But Solomon, all of his cups were made of gold. There's no one else in the world today that has the wealth that Solomon had. But Jesus owns 1,000 cattle owns cattle on 1,000 hills. Jesus owns every star that is out there. Jesus' wealth far surpasses the wealth of all kingdoms and all people that have ever lived on the earth, all combined. Jesus' wealth is far greater because he made the universe. They say that every single comet that is out there, the astronauts, they can live out there and they can look out there and say, you know what, there's like trillions of dollars worth of precious metals on every single asteroid, but we can't get to them because we're on the earth. Well, those belong to Jesus. Those belong to God. He made all that precious metal, and that belongs to him. Jesus' wealth is far greater than that of Solomon or any man that can ever live. And even though Solomon sat on a throne, his throne is no longer there today. Even though Solomon was king and he had some children that were kings after him, there's no king in Israel today except Jesus. Jesus is king of Israel. He's king of Canada. He's king of the United States. He's king of all the kingdoms. Jesus is Lord of lords and King of kings. And his kingdom and his throne is eternal. He's sitting at the right hand of the Father on his throne. So when Jesus says that there is one that's greater than Solomon today, see, that is Jesus. Jesus is far greater than Solomon. So when you look at people in the world today, there's some people in Hollywood that are very famous. There's some people that are doing some great things. There's some people that are missionaries in other countries that you think, they're doing an extraordinarily great amount of things. You know what? The greatest person on the world, Jesus, is far greater. So there is one that is greater than Solomon. And that's Jesus. Jesus is greater than Solomon. All right, so you guys are going to remember this lesson for next time, right? So when I ask you, what was the lesson? You're going to say, Jesus is greater than Solomon, right? All right, God bless you.